The confrontation between a human desire for meaning and a world that offers none. To me, everybody is a philosopher. I have a social obligation. I have to feel like or act like a certain way to be socially accepted.
All of socialization is to some degree a front that you put on, or you're pretending to some degree to have meaning, to share values. The bigger the group gets, the more distinct from authenticity it gets.
Is AI gonna mess up the economy? Like, what do I even do?
People graduating college and going right into this kind of mindset where divorcing from the norms of their parents.
The only thing I'm sure of is I come into this world and I'm going to leave this world. All right, Jonathan, welcome to the Self-Alignment Podcast. And today we have myself and Jonathan, my co-founder and CTO on Epistemic Me. And we're going to be talking about Camus and philosophy, the philosophy of the absurd, some neuroscience, probably some emotional concepts in there from Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett. And on this podcast, we bring on researchers, entrepreneurs, scientists, builders of the future, people doing big things with big stories to tell. And we give our own sort of take on AI alignment because we see that as the big problem to solve in this next century. So for today, the topic of discussion is this book. Actually, I have it right here, The Stranger by Albert Camus. Got introduced this book recently, and it's only 150 pages, but I'd highly recommend anybody go read it. We're going to be diving into the book a little bit, and in general, Camus' philosophy of the absurd and making sense of it for ourselves. And let's get into it. So I'll first give some primer on Camus' work, of which we've just read a couple things, and we'll probably have more pods on other philosophical works. We're now starting the story of philosophy by Will Durant, which is cool. But to start, The Stranger follows Maslow, who is a man emotionally detached from the rituals and meanings that structure modern life. When his mother dies, one of the craziest opening two lines of all time in all of literature, when his mother dies, he responds with indifference, unsettling those around him. Later, he kills a man in an almost senseless act and is put on trial, not just for crime, but for failing to perform expected emotions, which is an interesting concept, expected emotions. Through Maslow, Camus explores the absurd, the confrontation between a human desire for meaning and a world that offers none. In the end, Maslow finds peace not by finding meaning, but by embracing the void with clarity and defiance, that void defined by Camus as the absurd. So that tension point between we want to find meaning in everything, but the universe just has a vast indifference to what we care about, right? Life is going to go up and down and all around, right? He has this other work that we're going to talk about a little bit that's important to describe. It's this essay and lecture that he gave. It was, I think, a 9 or 10 page essay in written form. It's called Create Dangerously. Create Dangerously is Camus' call to artists and creators to tell the truth even when it's unpopular or risky. He delivered this shortly after receiving the Nobel Prize, and the essay challenges writers and artists in general to confront injustice without illusion and to create within the tension of beauty and suffering. He says that it is actually the artist's job to create with the meaning of liberation. So that means creating not just as entertainment for the rich and the elite and to make a dollar in capitalism, but to help create art that incites liberation in others. That's his whole thinking behind the essay Create Dangerously. So he insists that real art is forged in history and not as an escape from it, and that artists carry that responsibility to both honesty in general and humanity. So to create, he argues, is to revolt against chaos, to assert form, truth, and dignity in a disordered world. And the act of creation in itself becomes an act of rebellion or revolt and a refusal to look away at the tension between ideal and real. So we'll talk about The Stranger, we'll talk about Create Dangerously, we'll talk about the concepts of each, and then we'll reflect and discuss some questions I have prepared. So from The Stranger, do you have any high-level takes of these written works since you've read them? Maybe we do that first. Is give your general take. What would you give it out of 10 or something like that for each of those pieces? And then I'll go, and then we'll get into the discussion.
I guess I'll start with Camus didn't consider himself a philosopher. Most of the philosophy that I'm attracted to is trying to disambiguate cause and effect, and there are tools that we can put into computational sort of reproducible instruments, things like Michael Levin's work and Carl Christian's work, free energy principle. These are things that I see can help us understand the world incrementally better from the standpoint of we can build things and we can test them and we can stress test cause-effect relationships. So for me, the humanities it's an interesting thing, and I usually read it across trying to understand what culture is trying to understand, what problems is culture trying to understand, and what is the relationship between man and humanity. And I think that Camus lived in a time was really interesting, right? As World War II, he wrote this pre-World War II. He released it during Nazi occupation. Nazis actually had to approve this book going to print, which is an interesting take for book burners too. You have to approve your book for it to get to the populace. And then I think Camus, just personally, you can just tell he's personally struggling as an artist, and he's sharing his story with the world. That is his philosophy. And so he's not trying to be a philosopher. He's just trying to inspire being lucid in the world and trying to live with absurdity. So it's an interesting viewpoint that he lives from.
No, totally. And that you brought up the context in which he wrote, and that he does not consider himself a philosopher. I think that is really interesting, because to me, everybody is a philosopher, but I think there's also this general consensus around a philosopher is one who thinks a lot, then writes about the thinking and then spreads that around. And there's almost it's almost similar to meditation. When you think of meditation, you think of a Buddhist monk under a fucking waterfall. But actually anybody could just sit and do nothing for a minute and call that meditation. Being mindful is just being in the moment. So you don't necessarily need a waterfall. You don't got to be bald. You don't have to wear shell-in clothes. Same thing, I think, with philosophy, that you don't need to. What is a philosopher even look? That's an interesting thought in itself. I think I have some biased thoughts of maybe somebody in a rundown kind of suit, professory suit, smoking a cigarette, writing things, tobacco pipe. I don't know. That's what I have as a picture in my mind. But when I consciously think about it, I think anybody is a philosopher. Anybody that is acting in the world is a philosopher. You are expressing your philosophy as you engage in the world. Wait, what would you give The Stranger out of 10 and then Create Dangerously out of 10? I'm curious.
They're both really well written and enjoyable to read. So I put pretty high up there. I think the first and last paragraphs in The Stranger are monumental.
Totally. It's actually so good. It's ridiculously good.
So I'd probably give it an 8 or 9 in terms of worthiness of reading, enjoyability of reading, and the things that get you thinking about.
How thought-provoking the writing is. So for both of them, 8 or 9. Call it 8 and a half.
Totally. And I think Camus had 5 phases of his work, and I think we're just sampling. But his work takes an arc, and it tells the story of a man who just was living in this world and trying to understand things.
As we all are. Yeah. Some of them could write better than others, though.
Right. That's a very good writer.
Yeah. No, he's such a good writer. Very atypical for philosophers. Maybe probably because he doesn't consider himself one. He considers himself an artist. But I have found that in a lot of philosophical works, it's not as vivid imagery that he commands his written works. Here, I'll read the first line and we'll get into it. My mom died today, or yesterday, maybe. I don't know. That's the opening line. My mom died today, or yesterday, maybe. I don't know. That's one of the most famous openers in the world, which, because it is what it is, it's wow. That in itself conveys his whole philosophy around the absurd and sets the stage for who this character is.
How could you say more about a character with less words?
Seriously, this says so much. Wow, you don't even care that your mom died, or don't even remember if it was today or yesterday. Wow. But before we get into kind of emotional indifference and stuff that I'll answer. So I really liked reading The Stranger and reading Create Dangerously. And especially at this time, I don't know, lots of things are uncertain in the world with AI. Lots of people are getting laid off, even in tech, where everybody thought, who's going to get laid off from tech? And then Gen AI came out and turns out everybody. And then there's a state of the world in terms of politics, which we don't really have to get into, but it is just an interesting time. And then we see tons of money going into these data centers that are now going to be one of the most transformative projects that humanity takes on. So there is a lot of uncertainty in the world, in individuals' place in the world. So I think I'd give them both The Stranger 9 out of 10, Create Dangerously 9 out of 10. Just because it's well written, enjoyable to read, easy reads, and it's just infinitely thought-provoking. I actually wrote an essay from reading these works, so we'll release that in due time. If people are interested, I could tag it on this pod. But to go back to it, so my mom died today, or yesterday maybe, I don't know. That's the opening line from his famous book, The Stranger. So some discussion questions. What does emotional indifference signal? Numbness, detachment, or defense, or maybe anything? I think let's even just converse about the fact that the whole point of the book is just demonstrating that this character doesn't give an ounce of a shit and just lives moment to moment. And that is his way of trying to be free, actually. And so this question is actually around emotional indifference, but there's an interesting dynamic there, which is in the book, he doesn't see himself as emotionally indifferent. He's just acting. Other people around him perceive that he's emotionally indifferent. Any thoughts to say on that concept?
I mean, there's a lot of layers here, but the title of the book is called The Stranger. I heard The Outsider was maybe one translation of it that initially got brought about. In any case, this is a person who is created to butt up against social norms. And so he just goes situation to situation, being rational, responding to situations normally, talking the amount of time, speaking as he thinks is appropriate. But it's completely against the norms of the society he lives in. And so his role as the stranger is to just be his normal, rational self, and then in reflection hear how appalled the normalized society is to his being. Okay, we got a lot of influence from Kafka. Kafka also had these characters that would be stewarded through a bureaucracy. And I think you just kind of see the scene by scene play of here's my character, here is the self-authentic version of them, then butting up against reality. And it's just very influenced by Kafkaesque, right? Who writes in a Kafkaesque way.
Were there any moments that you were, whoa, what the fuck, that is weird, when you were reading it? The character's actions.
I thought the book did a good job of making you relatively sympathetic to the character. There were definitely some places where it's, why didn't you defend yourself better? I remember thinking that a lot, where in the trial, in his talks with the magistrate, he set himself up to fail in a way that just seemed completely self-destructive. But it was clear this character just didn't even care enough to construct his own defense. What does it matter if he died today or died tomorrow? This was sort of his response to absurdism. This existential kind of point of view that, what does it matter? I'm here to my best. And even I think his relationship with Marie, I guess I'll marry you, right? As basically, it doesn't matter if I marry you or not. So if it makes you happy, then why shouldn't we get married?
So for the audience listening to this, the day his mom died, or was it the day after, one of the day after he goes, day his mom's funeral is, or the day after, he goes back home and he meets a woman who used to work with him as a coworker, and they had a fling. And so he started a fling the day after or day of his mom's funeral, which is not normally the time somebody would be starting a fling. I don't know. I haven't examined that statistically, but just from a human level, I don't think that's generally the. And people in the book make comments on that later, when he kills a man out of his vast indifference to the world. And honestly, because of the sun being his eyes was why he killed a man, which is a fascinating reason. And then he's put on trial, and a lot of people are nitpicking his actions from his mom's funeral. And then this fling ended up becoming, I don't know, weeks later, the woman asked, do you want to be married? And obviously, I know women that want to be married, and they don't want to be asking that. Right? That's not something they want to be asking. They want the guy to ask them to marry them if they're in love, and they are trying to plan out together. So what Jonathan says, just to give color context to the audience, is that in that moment, the ID guy, he basically was, what does it matter if we're married or not married? And she's, I'd be happy. And he's, okay, then let's do it. Basically his response, which is just, oh my God. I didn't personally know where things were going. So I was just, this guy is so weird, so out there, but you just almost can't stop turning the page to find out what other weird shit this guy get into. What are your thoughts on that? The whole indifference to love for a lot of people, the essence of being.
I think the character definitely reminds me of people, definitely reminds me of modalities of myself, right? Where it's a perspective you can take on that is authentic. I think of this episode of Seinfeld where Jerry says, I don't dance because it's stupid. Your date wants to dance with you, you want to be social, you want to be, he's just stupid. And I think that shows up to most situations, just it's dumb. Yeah. You can take that point of view with pretty much everything in Western civilization if you want to. A lot of times it just, I don't have the energy to pretend I'm into this.
That's a very relatable thing. Is,
right.
Oh man, I don't have the energy to be into this right now. I have a social obligation. I have to feel or act a certain way to be socially accepted.
And I think that's part of what Camus' premise is, that all of socialization is to some degree a front that you put on, or pretending to some degree to have meaning, to share values. And the bigger the group gets, then the more sort of distinct from authenticity it gets. The more you have to pretend, the bigger the group gets. One dichotomy I liked in that regard was the trial, where everybody that was judging Mark, and then the two people that were friends with him or were close to him, actually thought well of him, right? So in the small circles that they had where they could be closer to authentic and closer to one another, you had two people that appreciated him, but they had no defense of him on this other stage, which is the social norms of how we're supposed to act in public.
That is interesting. So if I remember right, what Jonathan's speaking to for some context is Marceau's on trial. There's a jury, strangers, nobody knows him. That's how it should go. And then they bring in character witnesses. And the whole trial should be about, did this guy murder this dude? Was it pre-murder? Did you plan this out? Or was this just an act of emotion?
And self-defense.
And so Marceau's whole thing was, dude, I just got sun in my eyes. It just bothered me, and then I shot the guy. Which is the craziest. I'll just say that will never fly in a normal society. But that's how he thought, and the author did a great job. You believe him when he's saying this by the end, where you've learned about his whole character, the arc of his character, how he acts, just very indifferent to everything. And then they brought in character witnesses to examine how he was during his mother's death, as if that matters at all for the actual thing at hand, which is him murdering a dude or not out of self-defense. So the commentary there Camus is making is, even though that isn't, the problem is people can't make sense of the guy. That's everybody's problem of it, is that you don't act us. So that's the thing to pick at. And that's the thing with which we should judge the rest of your life and give you a life sentence. So Jonathan's saying that people that actually got close to Marceau over time actually just had nothing but good things to say to him, about him. They couldn't speak to the murderer because they weren't there, but they acted as character witness of this guy over time. And then everybody else, the prosecutor was trying to throw his character on under the bus to be, look, he didn't give a shit about his mom dying. He had a fling right after his mom died. And that was essentially enough for the whole jury to decide, let's condemn this man to not just prison for life, but also let's just kill him in front of everybody. That was the sentence he ended up getting. It was either being hanged or having the head chopped off, but just a public spectacle of this guy should die, which is commentary of, if you are different than the social norms, you'll be put out to dry. That's the commentary. What are your thoughts on that?
You mean the general premise of...
Yeah, just the whole, that social norms are everything. A lot of layers there, but feel free to respond to whichever one that resonates. In
a certain sense, I think that the ability to be different than your tribe or your community or your civilization is an entitlement of Western civilization. It doesn't fly in authoritarian Russia today.
That's true.
And if you go back to times pre-modern, to be different was, you were ostracized, you were kicked out. And reading the book, The Great Transformation, the Indus cultures had, at least some subsect of India, had these cultures where, as an adolescent, you would choose whether you were going to opt in to the rituals of your society or you're going to live in the jungle. You're welcome to live in the jungle.
A coming of age pick.
It was a coming of age
to do this.
And it was a 50-50 thing. Some people would say, I'm just going to go live in the jungle and
opt in.
I'll be back and forth and stuff like this, but I'm out of the society. And I think there is a certain entitlement to acting in a way that is unsafe, right? Mm-hmm. He's a threat to people. Perhaps they're scared that he's a threat to their children, their well-being, right? Yeah. And so I think conformity plays a role in a civilization that Western civilization gives us the right to take for granted and to be privileged about, which, and that's what I grew up into, all of that privilege and all of the,
Totally.
So it is an interesting sort of justification about the nature of humanity over time and where we land in the place, France in the 1940s.
So let's talk about that, France in the 1940s. This is World War. He grew up in World War I, World War II. He's seen the world fight itself. How do you think this reflects on his commentary here about conformity? Do you think those intersect?
The nature of that, I'd say it has to. I think commented famously a lot of the politics of the time on the wars that were going on. Life itself has a little bit more fluidity to it when you see large groups of people being killed or battles being fought and stuff. And I think in particular was really concerned with what's the condition by which all this conformity in total creates these political discussions where Hitler rises to the top.
And then could just kill a bunch of people.
And there's no sort of stopping that, right? Yeah. And so there's nothing to fight against the conformity to right things or correct things. If the group consensus is off or it's creating a system that just doesn't serve the people, it becomes this kind of machine. It reminded me of another writer at the time, Hannah Arendt, who wrote a book called The Banality of Evil. And it was just about the pure force of bureaucracy led by ideology and pure cog in the wheel. And Kafka talks to this too, right? So I think they're living in a time where we have massive industrialization and weaponization. We have huge bureaucracies. We have a way of living under all of this. You're wondering if you might just be killed or your rights taken away.
Very uncertain times.
What does it mean? And I think there's a lot of parallels to this today too.
Just in terms of the uncertainty of what's going to happen from multiple vectors. There's the climate change. From the street interviews, kids are thinking about climate change. They're thinking about, is AI going to mess up the economy? What do I even do? Because people, even a generation back from me, could have gone and worked a normal job and buy a house, entry-level job, buy a house. Nowadays, you can't do that shit. And then even our younger generation, I feel I got lucky, even though I was poor in college. Just timing-wise, I got lucky in terms of, and had more privilege than the future generations in terms of being in the right place at the right time to transition to a tech job, make enough wealth for myself to buy my own place. But future generations, it's going to be even harder to secure land or have assets in your name. And so there's just so much uncertainty with, is climate going to kill us? Is AI going to kill us? Are we even going to have lives worth fighting for? What does it mean to live a good life right now? So it does mirror that in some ways. I really hope that we don't get another Hitler type situation. That would be real bad. That's an interesting thought.
And you're hearing a lot right now about the buy-in to when people don't have the stakes, they don't own a home, they don't own stock in the market, then they don't have a stake to participate in the capitalistic system. And then they become a populist nihilist. The system's not working for me, so populism can solve this in some way, whether it's on the left or right point of view. And I think as we just see people graduating college and going right into this kind of mindset where they're divorcing from the norms of their parents. And since they're becoming the stranger, right? They're opting to become the stranger because the system is not working for them. But I think there are aspects of that during Camus' time too.
That is interesting. It would be, for example, I think a lot of existentialist philosophers wrote their works because of just trying to make sense of how fucked the world was then. We're just killing tons of us. What the fuck, Hitler? But just think about that. You're in the Hitler regime. It's normal to kill a ton of people. It's normal to ostracize people. It's normal to commit acts of inhumanity. And it's not normal. You're the stranger if you speak out against that. So that's how I saw the intersection of just who is the stranger in the Hitler regime within that context. And it could be abstracted to anything, right? If you're a white dude in Asia, you're the stranger, right? In any context. But the shared context we have is humanity, our own humanity. So he had this other very famous quote at the end by Maslow on the absurd and him speaking to the philosophy, I opened myself to the gentle indifference of the world. That was such a great line. And this is Maslow right before he's gonna be carried off to go get killed. And I think it was the magistrate was trying to get him to believe in God and repent for his sins and have a sense of mental clarity and peace going into the void. And Maslow was, no, dude, I got this. I'm more mentally clear than you are because you're still thinking about godly things. You're thinking there is this stuff that exists. And Maslow is on this side being, the world's indifferent, man. No matter if you call it a God or whatever you're saying or peace, it doesn't matter. Nothing matters. And so his definition of freedom through his actions is opening himself to the gentle indifference of the world and being okay with that and operating that. So a couple things. One, what do you think of the quote? And then two, there's some questions here. What does it mean to align with an indifferent universe? Is the universe really indifferent? I guess that's another way to put that. So interesting concept to explore.
If I remember correctly, before that, he was being sold on the concept of God and forgiveness and an eternal soul, which he just, it made him mad.
I could read that part because when he went off, it was actually so good. Hang on, I'll read that. I think it'd be useful. It was the most animated he got. So the priest, it was a priest. The priest gazed around my cell and answered in a voice that sounded very weird to me. Every stone here sweats with suffering, I know that. I have never looked at them without a feeling of anguish, but deep in my heart, I know that the most wretched among you have seen a divine face emerge from their darkness. That is the face you are asked to see. And this is the priest trying to make Merceau a godly man. And Merceau says, or in his monologue, this perked me up a little. This is the first time ever he's been perked up in the whole series. By the way, he's about to die. And the guy's talking about the stones. I said that I had been looking at the stones in these walls for months. That's when he perked up. There wasn't anything or anyone in the world I knew better. Maybe at one time, way back, I had searched for a face in them. But the face I was looking for was as bright as the sun and the flame of desire. And it belonged to Marie, the woman that he was going to indifferently marry. I had searched for it in vain. Now it was all over. And in any case, I'd never seen anything emerge from these sweating stones. The chaplain, I think I'm pronouncing that right, looked at me with a kind of sadness. I now had my back flat against the wall and light was streaming over my forehead. He muttered a few words I didn't catch and abruptly asked if he could embrace me. No, I said, this is Merceau. He turned and walked over to the wall and slowly ran his hand over it. Do you really love this earth as much as all that? He murmured. I didn't answer. So what ends up happening is the priest is just flabbergasted because he's talked to many men on death row and all of them have turned to become godly men at the end. And Merceau is just like, no, dude, get away from me. And so the priest here is just super frustrated. He says, no, I refuse to believe you. I know at one time or another you've wished for another life. And fast forward, this is what Merceau ends up getting triggered, and this is the most animated he had ever been. Then, I don't know why, but something inside me snapped. I started yelling at the top of my lungs, and I insulted him and told him not to waste his prayers on me. I grabbed him by the collar of his cassock. I was pouring out on him everything that was in my heart, cries of anger and cries of joy. He seemed so certain about everything, didn't he? And yet none of his certainties was worth one hair of a woman's head. He wasn't even sure he was alive because he was living a dead man. Whereas it looked as if I was the one who'd come up empty-handed. But I was sure about everything, surer than he could ever be, sure of my life and sure of the death I had waiting for me. Yes, that was all I had, but at least I had as much of a hold on it as it had on me. I had been right, I was still right, I was always right. I had lived my life one way, and I could just as well have lived it another. I had done this, and I hadn't done that. I hadn't done this thing, but I had done another. And so, it was as if I had waited all this time for this moment and for the first light of this dawn to be vindicated. Nothing mattered, and I knew why. So did he. Throughout the whole absurd life I'd lived, a dark wind had been rising toward me from somewhere deep in my future, across years that were still to come, and it passed. This wind leveled whatever was offered to me at the time in years no more real than the ones I was living. What did other people's deaths or a mother's love matter to me? What did his God or the lives people choose or the fate they think they elect matter to me when we're all elected by the same fate, me and billions of privileged people, him, who also called themselves my brothers? Couldn't he see? Couldn't he see that? Everybody was privileged. There were only privileged people. The others would all be condemned one day, and he would be condemned too. What would it matter if he were accused of murder and then executed because he didn't cry at his mother's funeral? Salamano's dog was worth just as much as his wife. The little robot woman was just as guilty as the Parisian woman Masson married, or as Marie, who had wanted me to marry her. What did it matter that Raymond was as much my friend as Celeste, who was worth a lot more than him? What did it matter that Marie now offered her lips to a new Merceau? Couldn't this condemned man see? And that from somewhere deep in my future, all the shouting had me gasping for air, but they were already tearing the chaplain from my grip, and the guards were threatening me. He calmed them, though, and looked at me for a moment without saying anything. His eyes were full of tears. Then he turned and disappeared. Fast forward a little bit more. As if that blind rage had washed me clean, rid me of hope, for the first time in that night, alive with signs and stars, I opened myself to the gentle indifference of the world, finding it so much myself, so a brother, really. I felt that I had been happy and that I was happy again. For everything to be consummated, for me to feel less alone, I had only to wish that there be a large crowd of spectators the day of my execution, and that they greet me with cries of hate. What a guy.
Strong finish.
Right? They greet me with cries of hate. Man, this guy's hardcore.
In his indifference, that's his last glimpse of lucidity, is
yes,
he can be sure that he's going to be greeted with hate at his own execution, and that is to live at his last moments.
For him, at least I'm sure of these things. Everything else I'm not sure of, but at least I'm sure of these things. It reminds me of just the word dogma, because it's this priest that came in, tried to give him a bunch of dogma, and he's like, you can't even be sure of that shit. What are you talking about? The only thing I'm sure of is I come into this world and I'm going to leave this world.
And that's a whole section there, was just the articulation of the dogma that he saw in everything, right?
Yes.
And how right he could be versus the dogma. And I think Kim was trying to say a lot in those little sentences, right? It's a commentary on the religion. The priest hasn't even lived. He's just swimming in this dogma.
Here,
right?
Yeah. He's just trying to spread the dogma. What kind of life are you living?
And even the dogma of the people that are going to the execution. Because Camus had spoken out, it was one of his top causes actually, was to remove the death penalty. Mm-hmm. And people make an example of people at an execution. And so they come with hate and they vilify this action and this actor as if it is cementing a social value in place. Very dogmatic, right?
Hey, there's a truth, you are wrong. And what you get for being wrong is you get the worst thing.
And I think that's the overall point, was to be right versus the dogma is a risk.
And bridging that to Nazi Germany, if you were Maslow speaking up against the crowd and what they wanted, you would have been sentenced to death too. If you were speaking up for the Jews back then, your whole family would be fucking dead. So that is an interesting commentary. It's also interesting to me that Maslow was the most animated during this time than the whole book. He's just found mental clarity and happiness. He's ecstatic, actually. He's pretty mad at the priest for provoking him, but you could just tell that he just goes off on what he believes is his own truth. And there's a lot of passion behind that. More passion than the whole book that he's shown here. And right before this, what was also interesting to me was that he was practicing mindfulness. If you remember, he was trying to be, oh, why am I having these desires? Let me stop. He was having thoughts of, oh, I'm missing Marie or whatever. He was having those types of what if thoughts. And then he caught himself. And then the priest comes in. And in the act of catching himself, if I remember right, he was quite pleased with that. And then he starts pondering, if I remember right, how his mother felt towards the end of her days, to better empathize with her. It was some high level, I would call it almost psychopathic level of how he was just commenting on, oh, hey, mother must have had thoughts of yearning. That was the sense that I got from him. He's like, we don't do that. We don't yearn though. Okay. Do you think the universe is indifferent?
I have my own point of view
about it.
About the universe. I think life is an opinion.
Say more on that. What do you mean?
Just to say that the universe is completely indifferent, and then to look at the development of life on Earth across a star system, a universe that has trillions of stars. I think that there are forces at play that create sustainable ways that the consciousness can exist and continue. And I think we don't know what the opinion means yet. I just think that staying on the path of life is something that the universe afforded us. And so I don't think it's completely indifferent myself. I think the quest to maintain life's journey is really a unique opportunity, and it definitely biases action one way versus another. And I think all of us that are sitting here today are here because our ancestors were biased in that particular way. That is,
they wanted to optimize their evolutionary fitness function, for sure. That's why we're here. Let's be real. That's why we exist.
Right. In everything that we talk about, the way we interpret the world through art or how we're going to respond to something in a certain situation, it at least carries all of that baggage of piles and piles of generations of ancestors who were selected for natural fitness of finding a way to continue to live. That shows up in so many ways in every moment, every episode of our conscious being.
So interesting. Do you then think that we are just manifestations of the universe experiencing itself? That's like the Benjamin Bratton sort of take, right? We're all just extensions of the universe trying to make sense of the universe.
Right. The very Eastern way to look at things. The universe is just turning its neck to look at itself, right? I think it's one way to look at it. And I don't know that I feel an instrument of the universe or that I have a particularly privileged point of view, but I think that the collective population of consciousness is the universe making sense of itself.
I don't think I feel that way either, where I am an instrument of the universe. But I wonder if even not having that thought is an instrument of the universe. It makes me question things, because if we bring in neuroscience into this, right, what Jonathan was saying was that there's lines of ancestry that we've had where their brains were all prediction machines trying to just exert their will into the world to just optimize our chance of being here, essentially, to survive and then spread their genes, make children. That's why we're here. So then it holds, okay, if we realize that our brains are just prediction machines, then what would it mean if my brain did believe I was an instrument of the universe? Or is it being an instrument of the universe? You don't believe that? I don't know. Just an interesting thought.
It's interesting we came upon the word instrument, right? And I think Mu's absurdity is really that. One way I heard it described was to carry a knife into a gunfight, or not even that. It's so absurd that you're carrying a knife into a complete army that's armed with machine guns and artillery, and you're saying, I've got the instruments that I need to fight this war. And that's man's quest for meaning, given the tool sets that we have of sense making.
Oh, I see.
It's that absurd, right?
That makes sense. Who are we to exist if we're bringing just our human brains into this world where there's, 120, I forget the numbers, 120 billion ebooks made every second or something like that. There's some stupid number that explains how many ebooks worth of data are we generating every single second. And our brains cannot compute that, right? So then who are we bringing the tiny brain as a knife to this gunfight of information making sense of the world?
That's right.
But we're trying anyway. One could argue that we only can take on the climate change problem because we've had certain members of us go and do science and create sensors that help us measurably and objectively identify climate change, the glaciers or tide or whatever, temperature. It's funny. Is that just the human condition then? Even though we're all just bringing a knife to the gunfight, we're all just going to do it anyway.
To crave meaning at every step of the way, but to have effectively no tools to
the overall outcome.
That's the absurdity of the human condition.
How do you absorb absurdism into your own personal philosophy?
In some sense, I feel it every day. One way I feel it is that to have a sense of agency, you feel, okay, there are things in the world that I can change and things that I can't, and trying to draw that line. And then you realize how many things existed in this world before we were here: our highways, our infrastructure, our
running
global trade, all this stuff. It was just laid down by monumental efforts by the populations of our ancestors. And then now I'm supposed to think that I have agency in this world. And it's a little absurd, right? And
totally.
And I think where we live in Silicon Valley and having, okay, now I have these tools that our ancestors didn't have. So now I can rethink things in ways that they didn't before. But it's still to think that, say, now that I have AI, I can reinvent education is both a valid hypothesis and absolutely absurd at the same time.
No,
you know what
it
I mean?
is. It is interesting, this philosophy to me. It's, if you take it at its base, it is essentially the tension point between human, trying to find meaning in everything out of life, and the universe not giving anything on that. Human searches for answers from universe doesn't give anything. Man finds something anyway. That's essentially what life is. And so if we say that's what the absurd is, then I would say that philosophy is almost at the foundation of every philosophy, of every life, because we are all trying to find meaning in life. And for me and you have talked about this because I wrote on it and shared it with you, but moving over into Create Dangerously, there's an essay that Camus wrote about how it is the artist's responsibility to create art intentionally and to look at both real and ideal and look at suffering and create art that helps liberate others from suffering by even helping them be aware that they are Sisyphus rolling a boulder up the hill, because we all are. And it gave me this metaphor as I'd read through it, which is speaking to and extending what you say about, whoa, all this infrastructure existed before I even fucking came out of the womb, before my parents even thought about me. We had running water, we had this materials to create couch or whatever, all the stuff we take for granted, honestly, electricity, food. Think about just an avocado reaching you. It's wild to think about. The avocado you get at the farmer's market. How did the farmer's market even exist? And then the farmer had to plant this. How did we even cultivate avocados all year round? That's a global supply chain solve, right? Wow. So at some point, people didn't have avocados. And here we are eating our fucking privileged avocado toast. You know what I mean? So there's definitely some absurdity there. And back to it. So even though I think the philosophy to me is, even though nothing makes sense, everything still matters. Because in the space of accepting that nothing makes sense, then comes the existentialist philosophy of you pick your own adventure then. And Camus in Create Dangerously says to all artists, your pick your own adventure should be in liberation of others so that they see that nothing makes sense and that everything should still matter and that they're liberated from the sort of, I take this way, but the hedonic treadmill that they're on. So for me, I tend to think absorbing absurdism into my philosophy of being self-aligned or self-aligned to who I want to become, where I say that we're all artists, not just the people that create art, but in the act of life, choosing to live or getting out of bed and just living your life, doing whatever you're doing, you don't live isolated from everybody else. Everybody, generally speaking, unless you've escaped capitalism, you balled out or you decided to go to the jungle or whatever, everybody lives in respect to other people. You have your social self. So how I integrate his philosophy into mine is that if his philosophy is about, let's accept that nothing makes sense, and in that, let's choose purpose anyway, and in that, if you're an artist, choose to create art that liberates others to see this way. Then for me, I say that we're all artists because, think about this. Have you ever met a human that doesn't have a role model? Right? No. Every human I've ever met has always had at least one role model, somebody they looked up to in some way, somebody that's affected them. It's how we learn, right? That's part of being human. So if you have a role model, what does that mean? That means you look at that person and the way they live and experience life and the way they act or behave in certain conditions, good, bad, ugly, whatever, and you say, I want to live that. That's what a role model is to you, where you want to act that person or think that person or behave that person throughout life in different contexts, and you might have different role models for different contexts. So what that says to me is anybody could be anybody's role model. You living life, I've had teachers that were role models to me, but maybe they're not Kobe Bryant, right? Everybody, when they go through life, has people that are either famous or not that has impacted them in the way that they choose to live. So because of that, I tend to think in my philosophy that if we're all role models or can be to somebody else, then the way you live is the art that you paint on your blank canvas. That's how I think about it. So then Camus activates the artist to say, go make art to liberate others to think this way. And I say, go live the best life you can, knowing that your actions are brushstrokes on your own painting that end up being your magnum opus someday when you're dead. And how many people look at that painting of your life and feel and think that I want to live my life that way. That's how I absorb it into my philosophy of becoming your best self.
And so where do you draw the line of rebellion and conformity?
Where do I draw the line of rebellion and conformity? Because, and let me know if I'm understanding this right, but when we spoke about conformity before, it's almost a social tool to help us grow.
There's a certain feature to it, or it's a shared fiction that brings us together in the Harari sense of religion is shared fiction, God is dead. It's a feature until the shared fiction is so abstracted from reality that it's actually harmful to values you want to live. And then when Camus talks about rebellion and Create Dangerously, he's saying, this is our way of showing people the inclusive common experience to being that is outside of the cage of the conformity. And so then this is what I've always struggled with, is how to think about the conformity versus the rebellion.
I have some thoughts here. I think they are both necessary for humanity to progress, because I see this in teams. Just take a team. You have 10 engineers on your team. 2 of them are AI native. Okay, if you have the 2 AI native guys, you guys just run the whole product now and we already have a product live. They're probably going to fuck up with a lot of shit. And then their customers might not be happy because they're messing up production with experimental techniques. And then you have the other 8 engineers that are stable, the conformists, rebellion, conformity. I've seen this pattern play out a lot in my career, which is you always need change makers, and you need a good ratio of that to other people who could conform, who could farm. Another example is the hunters versus farmers, right? But what you say, okay, let's back it out a little bit. How, if we take humanity's all on the same team, we're all on team Mother Nature, team universe, right? Let's just assume that. Then Camus got to his level of sense making in the universe with his skill set of writing to create works of art, create dangerously, to activate people to be more rebellious, right? That's his purpose. He's a change maker in that way. He's getting other change makers to wake up or create more change. And so now we zoom out, that's only one artist or one writer in all of time. So then there's other ones too that speak about probably conformity or have less of a rebellious take. And I'm sure that would speak to some level of philosophy to the conformist. So in all of time, what I'm trying to say is in all of time to make change, you have change makers and then you have people that don't. And I have, at least just reading through history or just experiencing what I've experienced on making products and businesses and stuff, watching teams, I just think you always need both. Because if you have somebody that's almost too rebellious, even on that spectrum, if you're so rebellious to where you never really accept anything, then there is no ground to stand on, in a way. But if you're always too much of a conformist and then you end up with Hitler as the president and then everybody conforms, it's shit, this can't be good for everybody. So I think it's probably just a balance. And at the humanity level, if we're taking the whole approach of the only truth, if we take a truth as the universe is experiencing itself, sensing itself, and we're instruments of it, whether willingly or not, then I think to progress on that, we could only speak to the historical pattern, which is there's always been rebellious people and always been conformist people. So maybe we're all just cells. Some of us are just rebellious cells and that's our job, is to do it. And then some of us are, no, homeostasis, guys. Just keep it normal. I don't know. I need to marinate on this more, but any thoughts from that?
I have a lot because I think it's something I've lived through in the sense, but one thing that comes up, I think it's a feature of male and female in relationships.
Wait, say more on that. What do you mean? Is Mei Lin going to hear this?
And she is a creature of comfort. So conformity or no, there's certain rebellion is not within the range of things. But I think this is the very nature of being female and being male.
We have been conditioned throughout time.
Females make all their eggs by the time they even start puberty, and then they act in a way to protect them. Whereas males go out and they rebel and they discover dangerous circumstances and they collect epigenetic information and they recreate sperm continuously. And so just, again, very genetic, our very ancestral being biases a lot. And I think that's why more rebellion in males than you do females across any given population of humans. It's one of those things. Growing up, I felt a stranger. And for me, it was my parents. My mother was Jewish. She wanted to raise me Jewish. My parents wanted to raise me Jewish. And they told me that there was a God. And I couldn't see the God, but the God was over everything. And I did not believe in anything that I couldn't experience. And so it had a very strong conviction, almost more so. You guys are dogmatic. I'm a 5-year-old going into my Sunday school with this attitude. By the way, I tried everything I could not to go to Sunday school. I would hide. I would do everything I could.
You're rebelling.
And I carry that with me. And also in school, because I thought the curriculum and the learning pace here is way too slow. This is very dogmatic and very ritualistic. And I'm a stranger here. At the same time, you sacrifice just the being a normal kid and having relationships and friendships and sharing these common beliefs and embracing in the traditions and the rituals and bonding, right? So I think I had a developmental cost. So this sort of existential stubbornness.
This rebellious nature.
And that sort of thing has expressed itself throughout my life. And I've wondered, so if I was more rebellious, I would be in prison or I'd be stoned in a spurious society, right?
You just took the slider to extreme.
And do I really admire the guy that can't follow the rules and is always being kicked out of class? And he's the ultimate rebel, right? So I'm a pragmatic rebel. Right? Yeah. Have I found the balance of this? And does that even matter?
What does that mean?
For sure, you can live a really good life in the United States just by being a conformist and going to get your graduate degree and getting a great job and getting paid very well and working at a big company, being a yes man the whole way through. And I think now we even see with Trump getting elected, who was so unpopular, you have all these people who are, let me conform. I'm down with the new Republican agenda. This is good for my business. And I could see that survival tactic, right? And I compare that with rebellion. And I think, again, we go back to these Kafka scenes of scene after scene. I'm presented with a challenge. And then how am I going, as a pragmatic rebel, how am I going to interact with this? Or am I better to be adaptable and be able to sleuth into a conformist mentality and really get people to believe that I'm drinking the Kool-Aid and I'm one of them?
So therein lies the question, which is, what is better? How do you stake in the ground an axis that is better to judge decisions? Right? Because that's what this comes to. Philosophically, at least to me, that's where the train of thought goes to, which is, what would be better for you, for humanity, for your wife, right? How do you define better there?
And from as far as I can tell from history, there isn't an absolute answer for this. It just so much depends on circumstance.
I think it's all contextual. It's all contextual.
I think adaptability is Probably key, and not being on the far extremes of either, and probably being able to recognize when to exercise your rebellion muscles and when to exercise your conformity muscles. Best way to participate in the civilization.
To maximize your evolutionary fitness function.
To be adaptable and to be able to recognize the situations that have the payoff that services your long-term needs.
Okay. So it sounds then, if we're deconstructing this into what is optimal, then the ability to even recognize what is an action of rebellion or an action of conformity given the context, that skill would need to be really high for this individual, right?
I think so.
So you'd have to have a lot of social intelligence.
And even, I've read Paul Graham says of Sam Altman lately that he's exceptionally good at acquiring power, to act in a way that he gradually accumulates power. And so
that makes sense.
And that happens at a scale. If you just, again, go back to seeing how is he interacting with people, where he goes out of the interaction with more power than he came into it.
Interesting.
Over and over again. And I think that's not just a type of emotional intelligence. There's a type of political savvy. There's a type of, I understand the system as a whole and all the interconnected parts, and I'm playing the long game here. That it's a model you have to hold in your head.
You have to have a good level of systems thinking, and you have to have social and political capital within that system that you accrue through relationships. And that also comes from your own proficiency. In capitalism, it would be about making capital or raising capital. So he's definitely shown himself good at that. This is an interesting thought that comes up at the intersection of, or tension point of, rebellion and conformity. But isn't conformity an act of rebellion against rebellion?
There's more people that have the point of view of conformity than have the specific point of view of rebellion that you have. So who are you rebelling against to be a conformist?
Totally. Okay, let's look at Nazi Germany. Let's say you're the one person that wants to speak up against a Nazi party. We're having a rally. Cool. You want to speak up about how everybody deserves to live. Okay, if you did that there, that would be rebellion there. But if you did that in the US, where that wouldn't be rebellion. Same behavior. They would be conformity there. So that's interesting. It's just all dependent on context.
The cultural context.
So that defines whether you're conforming or you're rebelling. So that also underscores what we just said, which is to then operate in the world, one must be able to read the context or read the room or read the organization structure, systems, hierarchies.
And I think that's definitely part of being human. A skill set of being human is to have these implicit understandings of shared knowledge and social norms, people that don't have to be explicit. They don't always have to be explicit. You have to read these things. And I think that's natural in the tribal environment when you're talking about role models and you're talking about seeing behavior and this kind of thing. But then we get to the point in, again, 1940s Western civilization in France. These are highly evolved social institutions now that you don't really have an emotional sense for, an innate sense of belonging. And there are norms that get passed down through these institutions and these structures that are...
It's not even conscious.
It's not part of the living human condition that we're evolved and adapted to. There are more monstrosities that are dealing with higher level parts of a civilization. You get caught in the gears of that system a lot. And I think a lot of the ridiculousness, as in opening up the news today, is just these gears are turning. We don't have a lot of intuitive sense for how we should deal with this, but we apply our intuitive sense towards it. But it's really not even in the realm of a family relationship or a community relationship or even a small town.
I think that's actually Camus' point, at least for him trying to have a rally cry to artists to be, we all live in the matrix, basically. Please make art that helps people be more aware of that. So to know that the gears turning are a product of unconscious decisions. Let's get people to be more conscious of the world that they live in and the matrix that is layered on top.
That's a really good point, because I was talking earlier about the privilege of even being able to act out at all, civilization and these higher level institutions that put you into these Kafkaesque bureaucracies. All of a sudden, it's not your job to be conformist anymore. It's your job to rebel, because this thing is not natural and nobody even intended it to be this way.
That's so interesting. There's a lot of nature, nurture, chicken or egg thinking here, at least for me. For example, because we're entrepreneurs, right? It is a rebellious profession by nature. You're rebelling against the status quo of a target market.
The products aren't good enough.
Exactly. Or this market's all wrong. We should create a new market. So what if, let's take a thought experiment. What if everybody in the world was an entrepreneur? Would the world still run? Or would we have too much change introduced all the time into the system?
It's hard to even imagine. Say everything got destroyed and then everybody's an entrepreneur all at once. I think it quickly would balance to where there's markets captured in power dynamics.
If we took this as The Sims, for sure, whoever would be first to get money would build a moat. And then it'd be your moat acceleration and velocity rates would win. And then because we still live in capitalism, it'd be whoever acquires the most capital fastest then starts influencing power to acquire even more capital faster than the rest with policy, right? Interesting. Okay, because I think we could spin it on these things. Let me move us along.
It's probably an optimal balance of existing companies versus entrepreneurs. And I think it's 2/3, 1/3 in the United States right now. I wonder if that is
for first number, second number, 2/3 for new entrepreneurs.
Of people work at government or a big company, and 1/3 of people start a small business or are entrepreneurs.
You think it's that many? I think it's way lower.
Isn't it? I think it's relatively the number. You think about the number of restaurants is a small business.
How much are there in proportion to the population in America? Let's ask the GPT intern. How many entrepreneurs are there in proportion to the population in America? Oh, interesting. The Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, GEM, never heard of this, have to see if it's not hallucinating, reports a total entrepreneurial activity rate of about 16.5% of adults in the US.
Okay, 1 out of every 6.
That's interesting. Another source claims 9.3% of the US so about 31 million entrepreneurs. But it also depends on how entrepreneurship is defined. But okay, either engaged in entrepreneurship, starting or running a business. Interesting. I didn't think it'd be that many. It's more than I thought. Okay, let's move into this because we are talking about this. So on creation as risk, to create today is to create dangerously. So his essay, Create Dangerously, is about everything we've talked about. It's the call to action to artists to say, you're helping to create art that inspires action, that inspires people to liberate themselves. So a couple questions here. What are the modern risks of truth-telling in tech, media, leadership, life, whatever? That's an interesting question. We were just talking about rebellion versus conformity and that example of would you say the same thing in Nazi Hitler rally party versus a rally party over in the US at the time? Right? If you say the same thing in either, it's going to be received differently. And this honestly kind of speaks to the heart of the question you were asking earlier. It's how does one live a good life balancing rebellion and conformity? I think the answer we got there, at least where I'm at, is it's context dependent. For example, in that, let's say you are that person at the Nazi Hitler rallying party. If you said something, then your head gets chopped off and your daughter and son, they get sold to slavery, all the bad things. Then your parents, everybody dies. Would that be the right choice? What is right in that context? From the point of view of I am trying to maximize my survival rate, that'd be the wrong thing. But the morally and ethically right thing would be...
I guess the notion of truth that Camus brings to the conversation, because you get in the situation where I feel very strongly about something. This is my truth, right? But I think where Camus going with truth is he's trying to talk about that lucidity, that inclusivity that is a fundamental part of the human experience that everybody can see in your work as art. And that's the truth to speak. Truth gets thrown around a lot today in ways that are absurd, for lack of a better word. And a capital T truth, I think, is just a dangerous thing to talk about and for anybody to be the steward of truth. So to even speak up at the rally and say, this is the ultimate truth, it better be something that everybody is experiencing simultaneously. For them to shoot somebody and say that I didn't just shoot somebody, that would be a circumstance where it's worth considering risks, because what's next, right?
Second order thinking. What's going to happen past me saying this?
But I also think Camus was in a different time where the broadcast medium was really one that he was involved in. So when he was talking about all artists speaking up or criticized one way or another, there's no way we're either too passive or we're too rebellious. Yeah. There's no right answer because these public norms are so crazy and they don't accept anything. That happened before the bifurcation of media that the internet, social media brought on, where I just think it's a very different thing now to speak your truth than it was in his time.
Tell me more about that.
And this has a philosophical arc, which I think he comes right before the set of postmodernist philosophers who speak. Deleuze is actually somebody who came up when I was reading your essay, because of the way he defined art was almost very symmetrical with the way that you were defining art.
Oh, okay.
And these are speakers, Boulard, who was the person who influenced The Matrix. The Matrix being a situation where media had become so fractioned and personalized that everybody experienced an effective different reality. That's where the whole idea of the Matrix came from.
I see.
And so postmodernism was a philosophical arc where they saw the technology of media, how it was adapting, how it was going to evolve, and they tried to picture what the future is going to be. And this is before Camus wrote this essay, right? And I think that we're living in that now. And I was mentioning this Gen Alpha who grows up in all these little caverns of this fractured media system, where they're going to be in some mini game of Minecraft that has some particular situation, and they're going to post a meme, and it's going to be funny because it's so absurd that it means anything, but it means everything at the same time.
To the microcosm that they're in.
And then the 6-7 is a way of social signaling that I'm part of all this absurdity.
What's 6-7?
You haven't heard 6-7?
No, what's this?
The kids are saying this everywhere.
They're saying 6, the number 6, and then 7?
They say 6-7, 6-7. And this is, we're talking 5-year-olds to 10-year-olds.
What is 6-7?
I first heard of it. My wife come back from an amusement park and kids were screaming it on a ride.
Okay.
Then she heard it from our nieces. And it's a Skrillex lyric that talks about some basketball player who's 6'7".
Oh, okay.
And then it was co-opted as a meme. And then there were nerdy white guys using this as 6'7", 6'7". And then all of a sudden, everybody's little brothers and sisters started, and it just became a meme of absurdity.
Oh, interesting.
And so this is...
Oh, wow.
And
hilarious.
Why is this funny to the younger generation? It's not a fart joke. It's not a sex thing. Where's the funniness in it? And they literally have a vector of humor, which is just the shared trauma of the absurdity that they live in. And I think it's caused by growing up with iPads and social media. Nothing means anything and everything means everything at the same time. The perfect way to say it is just this, you make the other kids laugh and everybody gets it.
That's interesting. I have been wondering if Camus' philosophy of the absurd would appeal to, you were saying this, I think, in one of our Slack messages, that it would appeal to the younger generations more because of the times we live in. Everything is just absurd. So that is a manifestation of that, actually.
So what does meaning mean in just this hyper-fractionalized media universe that we live in? You can have everything at your fingertips at once, but all of a sudden, everything's so empty at the same time. Everything's so lonely. It creates this tension between exactly the dynamics of individual sense-making towards this feeling that I'm supposed to have meaning, right? And it would be much different growing up today than when I did.
That's so interesting, because I've had this thought of ontological velocity. How do you grow towards your best self? I think of it as you're just making your sense making of the world. You're trying to get that to be a higher rate. You're trying to get the nuggets in the world that help with your prediction machine brain to grok it the right way to unlock different levels of clarity, right? A good example of this might be the people that have a health crisis and boom, their beliefs update with, oh, health fucking matters. Okay, I'm gonna get on that. And then they change their lives and they go become a marathon runner, whereas they were obese as fuck, right? That is also what I mean by ontological velocity. How do you increase the rate at which you make sense of the world and give evidence for making sense of the world, updating your beliefs, so that you live a better life or get to your best self? So that's one. But towards what you say, I'm just realizing that in that mode, everybody's ontological velocity is infinite right now. Because you could just, boom, ChatGPT, oh, I know it now. So it cheapens the effort. Whereas before, you had to put in effort to go be anything. Now, anybody could pose as a software engineer. Not anybody, but at a high level, anybody can make an app. So what does it mean to make apps anymore, to identify that way? What if you just took the effort out of everything having to do with the thing? Does it mean anything anymore? And I think maybe that is what kids face, because I remember when I was growing up, and kids, I'm 33, anybody younger than me, let me know what you think. But when I was younger and I was in middle school, we were just on the cusp of getting the internet and stuff. So to go seek out knowledge and write a paper, I still had to go to the library and get an encyclopedia. There was a level of effort. And now I can not only just research that in a second, I could also write the whole paper in 5. So then what does it mean anymore? I think that's something that people growing up nowadays have to grok with. And because of that, it's almost like you have infinite choice. Then with infinite choice, I think it's harder to pick. These thoughts are just coming up to me, so I don't have a tangible takeaway from it. But it just is the overall thought that if sense-making of the world has dropped to almost no effort compared to the past, then what does that mean for who do I want to be? That's interesting.
Well, I think even though you have all this knowledge at your fingertips, that there's still gradients of how you interact with it that are
True.
really important. The words that you're typing into the embedding systems of an OpenAI chat matter a lot, and how you frame things and how you ask a question. And I think that the tool, it lowers the bar for getting an answer on a lot of stuff, but it also elevates the ceiling.
That's a good way to
how
think about
sophisticated you can get, and how much background research am I going to bring into this prompt so that I get exactly the level of self-growth or learning that I need out of it. So
that makes a lot of sense. But do you think we're artificially lowering the ceiling for most simply by eliminating the bar? Because there's all those studies of people are becoming dumber by using these things.
I got into a debate recently about whether data centers cause cancer.
Okay.
And the bar is lowered to where somebody can search on Perplexity or Google, and it says, yes, there's a correlation between all the AI in data centers and the amount of cancer that's going on. And it doesn't mean that data centers themselves cause cancer. What's happening is that there's a system where the data centers are using more electricity, and us burning energy and having electricity has a cancer rate associated with it, and burning more energy and electricity increases that cancer rate. So there's a whole economic supply chain. Understand the correlation of these numbers. But somebody can have a lower bar to answer that question, but not to understand where the answer came from at the same time. And that all the information is there, but you have to have the curiosity to want to seek it out, to ask it, to pull it apart. And if anything, I think it makes the gradients and the differences that we can see between each other even greater.
I buy that. We could see who's just delegating all their thoughts to the machine. If you aren't, then you definitely see that. I buy that. I also buy that every generation is better somehow than the previous, simply because of level of access or resources or both. Think about the kids growing up with AI. I actually think that even if AI, this is a hot take maybe, even if people delegating their critical reasoning to AI, they're using it more, they're getting dumber. I think the people growing up today are going to be the hacker kids that grew up with the internet. They'll go start Google. I think there are people that are going to be at a lower artificial ceiling, but I think there's going to be people that blow past that simply because they're more curious and are also curious to use the tools in a way to augment, not to detract from who they are.
I think what you say is potentially contentious in the dimension of what's saying that generations go from sleeveless to sleeve. The next generations that this has happened all throughout history.
Of generations?
And the Romans, their golden generations were the warriors that won the battles, but then their grandkids had all the affordances where they wouldn't fight in battles anymore. They'd hire the mercenaries. And guess what? Rome has no army anymore, and it can be sacked by barbarians. And so there's this institutional decay that happens when strife is lessened. And I think in addition to that, we have this interesting phenomenon where people are coming from rural areas into urban areas, not having kids much anymore, and just living very different lives. And we have this demographic collapse that is imminent in every Western civilization that the United States gets to see how it's going to play out before we have to deal with it. To say every generation is more powered or better than the next, I think is pretty controversial because they may be less fit to deal with the problems ahead that they have to deal with. The previous generation was.
That's true. I guess I'll retract my generalized statement. I don't know. But I do think that there will be some kids coming. I just hold on to hope maybe. Maybe it's not a logical thing, but I hope that some kids growing up with AI today are very curious about it and they go change the world for the better. There is an interesting twist with this particular intersection of humanity, which is AI could maybe erase all work, right? Then is there strife in that world? Probably because we're human at a high level. But does there have to be? No, there also doesn't quite have to be strife right now. So
I think one thing, thinking about Camus' notion of art got me thinking about was that there's some artists are just masters at the way that they find to express the lucidity that Camus talks about. They find a canvas that didn't exist before, and they create art from becoming a master of that canvas and be able to depict the world. And I'm talking about Impressionist painting, for instance, the techniques that were developed before they were there, or even industrial sculptures today. There's people that can make AI their canvas and use it as a tool to achieve mastery in a way that nobody's had before. And I think that these are the things that are, yes, there's some people who just say, let me automate this task. Let me make my life easier this way. Then I think there's other people that are going to make AI they're going to achieve mastery through it. They're going to make it a tool, a canvas. They're going to give us ways of seeing reality that we hadn't thought of before.
I heard about this one tool. Heard it aligns your being with becoming. So you're the best. I think that's a good one to look out for.
With better use of the tool. Right?
Exactly. Right. It helps improve your ontological velocity while also reminding you of who you are. Okay, let's go through a few more. Hold up. Great discussion. And I learned about 6-7. I'm clearly old. This is what I'm realizing.
Oh, you got to look it up.
I'm so old. Oh my gosh.
This is why I watch shows on TV.
Just to get with the zeitgeist. I'm old, man. I'm old. Okay. Lucidity is the wound closest to the sun. That's what he says in Create Dangerously. So we were just talking about lucidity. There's a few questions here. This is not on here, but as I think about it, what does it mean to think clearly? What does that mean? Right? I think you can answer that at so many different levels, but maybe if you want to add some thoughts to that, that's something I was thinking as we were just talking about lucidity and clarity.
I think what Camus defined it as using the ridiculously inept sensory apparatuses that we have to understand meaning to understand what we can about what's real in our world. What is the human experience? I guess, does it need to be more than that to think clearly? Be authentic to the moment, to the sensory experience?
But would you include understanding the systems at play in which we live as part of that?
I mean, in the sense that they're part of the reality that we live in, yes, I do think so. I bring it all back to cause and effect. If something has a cause and effect relationship with my information world, then I've got to disambiguate that to the point where the cause-effect relationship originates.
Okay, so you have an understanding of it.
That's how I think about it.
Got it. Interesting.
I think it's fine to plug that misunderstanding with dogmas, because that's just a cognitive tool that we can use, but to call that a dogma and to know that there's opportunity then to go back to that and to really apply lucidity in that direction too.
So here's what I'm thinking, which is in that example, how do you disambiguate something? You'd spend time thinking about it, researching about it, coming up with to beliefs through experiments, through experiencing the world. Okay, so then it uses time and energy, which are limited. So no matter what station you're born at in life, you have limited time and energy. That's all we have. So then in the paradox of, okay, I want to make sense of the world, to make sense of myself, to live a good life, how do you prioritize? That's really hard. That's the problem everybody goes through, is the prioritization problem of where do I spend my time and energy to then discover more about the world, to discover myself. How do you think about that?
It's again a question I've thought about a lot. I find really challenging.
It's hard. I haven't found the answers to this myself, so that's why I'm bringing it up.
I think historically, you find a tribal role model and you figure out the way they live their life and you normalize yourself into that. And then you get old enough where you can find some way to maybe slightly individuate, and you keep the blinders on for a while, learn the practice, learn the trade, be an apprentice, and then maybe find your own way of doing that.
Got it.
And I think what's confusing now is which role model do you want to pick? And there's so many choices, right? And you can live lives that nobody else has ever lived before in any form or format.
That's true.
That's
true.
And that's an unbounded cognitive function, right?
It is.
I know there's one philosopher I used to listen to in sense making, and he just threw in the towel on sense making and joined a church.
He's like,
you know what? All of our ancestors figured all these things out about how we
go there.
I'm just going to do that.
So that's how he chose to prioritize, was use everybody else's priority function.
Yeah.
It culminated in this religion.
I think that's the way it's been throughout humanity.
That makes sense.
You do what your parents do, you follow the rituals.
You run the playbooks for a while, and then you're, let me add some new plays.
If you have that luxury, right? And
that's true.
This time, it's a crazy amount of choices about how to individuate as a human.
Interesting. I think, to me, there are things that you could hold more true than other things. For example, if I don't work out for a while and I go up a flight of stairs, I don't feel good. And I also know that when that is not good, I'm not firing on all cylinders. I don't feel myself. So I know that putting my time and energy towards my physical health has abundant returns. So I'm going to keep doing that. But it did take me a while. I wasn't always that way. It took me a while to get there, looking back. But that's probably, there's some level of these in religion. They have their playbooks, the Bible and whatever else. So here's the playbook for living a good life. I'd say that those make sense, that they're time battle tested in a way. So if you do live in some of these ways, you're probably going to get back more happiness points than if you weren't. But then the question is, if you weren't and created some net new path, could it create more happiness points than if you just went with this one? I guess that's the never-ending battle of rebellion and conformity.
That's a great way to look at it. You made me think about our health pillars and our clear dimension. Yeah. And we have 9 health pillars we modeled, and you can't evolve, you can't grow in all the different directions at once.
Or maybe you can, but they're tiny growth, not step function growth. It's not going to be optimal.
Totally. But you can choose, okay, maybe I'm going to take a conformist way to manage my mental health while I take a journey of new crypto asset investment classes for my financial
I'm
health.
going to go to the moon.
Yeah.
Which is the idea. So for everybody, we build this tool called Clarity. Please check it out. It'll be in the links. It's your thinking partner for life's complexities. And Clarity is a tool to help you grow towards your best self. And we have 9 pillars of self or pillars of health that make up the self and who you are. So there's your physical health, there's your mental and emotional health, there's career health and vocation health, there's financial health, there's your family, relational health, your community health. Are you in service? Do you feel you belong in your community? So there's these vectors, and our philosophy is that they make up the self. They make up who you are and your life. And so what Jonathan is saying is a very keen observation, which is you will never in your life be able to go full max sliders on growing all of them. And that is true. Even if I just reflect on my life, that's very true. There have been times where I'm more focused on certain parts. And what you say, which is, okay, I'll just take dogma for some of this. I'll just take conformity for some of this. And over here, I'm going to rebel. So that's smart with some things for sure. For example, if I had bad mental health, I'd probably go and trust the whole domain of mental health experts and what they would recommend as how does a human have good mental health. Then I would find works, Brain Energy or Outlive by Peter Attia or Steph Brian Johnson, and think about health span and lifespan. These guys are living longer, or these people are living longer, living without compromise to their movement, their breathing. I'll just go with that while I go figure out going to the moon on crypto, which is, how does one spend time and energy to prioritize? It's okay. If a playbook works to get you to a threshold you're okay with, then maybe take those. And then for somewhere else where you want to be an outlier, perhaps learn what the playbooks have to offer and just go rebel, do something different. And when I think back to a domain that we relate in, entrepreneurship, in 0 to 1, Peter Thiel famously says, it's stupid to compete. Go create a new market. That's the best way to win as an entrepreneur, is solve problems that people don't see to create a new market. It would mean fixing everything else and just rebelling hard at this one thing. At least that's how I grok it.
Interesting take.
That is interesting. Now it's making me think in the product, we should have, what are your priorities right now? But we don't have a way for people to, these are going to be fixed for now. Or I don't care about these ones for now. That would be interesting. In the act of prioritizing,
But we do.
I guess it's just what you're doing in it.
You're on the onboarding where you're at your satisfaction over the last 6 months.
Oh, okay.
That mean I'm content with this area for right now. Or at least we could
infer that.
We could make it mean that. That's how I've interpreted it in the calculation.
Actually, now that I think about it, that makes sense. But it's also making me think, should we give people a way to fix it? But also there's another thought, which is maybe we're thinking at a very different level about these things than maybe our average user. Who knows? We'll have to test it. But anyway, okay, let's move it along because it's getting close to time. Okay, here's an interesting one. If the self is constantly rewiring, is there any fixed truth about who we are? If our brains are just prediction machines trying to minimize surprise, maximize free energy, according to Carl Frishton, then is there any fixed truth about who we are? That's such an interesting thought. At high level, it's only the truth that we see because we're choosing it.
And that's what I was talking about before with capital T truth being pretty dangerous. But I think there are aspects of, I need to maintain this truth in order to relate to other humans. And be that a shared fiction or be that a fundamental, we can read the same language, we can identify the same words for colors and these kind of things. Those are truths that keep us coherent. So
what do you call it? That should have a word. Truths that keep us coherent?
I think intersubjective coherence.
That's how you describe that?
That's how I describe it. My ontological view, there's no such thing as capital T truth. There's only intersubjective coherence. There's only things that at this moment in time that we can all see and feel the same phenomenon and have the same internal response to it.
It could be as true as that.
That's as true as it can get.
I see. Okay, but the question talks about truth about who we are. So do you feel there's some truth that your identity has cling on to? I
do think that we're constantly creating the reality that we want to, but I think that I have all these previous selves that also create realities, and there's consistency amongst all those creations. There absolutely is an internal
bit more capital T, but not quite full capital T.
It is capital T means it's absolute truth. It's true for everybody, right?
Forever.
If something is true for every version of myself over my entire life, and there are aspects of this, I need another breath to live. Those things are going. That's true for me my whole lifetime.
How do we know that unless we? That's interesting. It reminds me of what is that paradox of the
Theseus?
Is it Theseus?
Michael Levin talks about that one.
The ship of Theseus. I want to make sure I get that right. Is that it? Ship of, and it's about the whole problem of if a ship gets its parts replaced over time, and every single part at some point has been replaced over years, is it the same ship? And from what I've read of the philosophy, it's more, we can't argue it either way. You can argue it either way, depending on what stance you hold, you're right. That's what I got from it. But this is the same question, essentially. Is there a truth in who you are? And what you said is, there have been things that have been true for all of my past selves, and that consistency is not something you question anymore. That's an interesting thought. I think I record my consistencies, I guess I'll say, is instead of just saying truths. I record the consistencies of my observation of self, of at least who I want to be and generally express myself as, in my core values. And those are things that I guess those aren't truths, but those are things that I would to be true for me. And in that, I become more of who I want to be.
And Camus talked about values in the sense that there's no sense in having an ultimate explicit meaning, ultimate external set of values, but there is, like, to create those for yourself is what the lucidity journey is about.
Interesting. That's cool. We're all on that journey. That's very relatable to everybody. That's interesting. Everybody is their own ship of Theseus, and we're all just Sisyphus rolling a boulder up a hill. We just have to see that truth. It reminds me of another thought, which is that, so Camus talks about how, at least what I infer of his reading is that artists have that mastery of, you bring in Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett's work, right? And it's, what are emotions? Emotions are things that the brain signals for you to do things, right? To actualize or to ensure your survival.
Okay.
So if we take that to be true, it's what the brain thinks it needs to send you as a signal to be, go do shit. Go feel this way, you're hungry, or you'll go get food for me, right? Okay, and sometimes it makes mistakes, that's what she also says. But in this, I think of it, if artists are the masters of creating a medium to send the message of feel this way, and then act this way as a result, then that's really the mastery, which is how do I give people the feeling that they need to take action themselves? Does that make sense?
How do I give people the feeling
they need to be able to take action to liberate themselves? That is what the artist does then. The best art is the most emotionally evocative art, right? Yeah. So then thinking about it this way from a neuroscientific lens, it's combining Camus' work and neuroscience. It's, if we accept that feelings are the predecessor to emotion, and if we accept that your brain is a prediction machine that is trying to send you signals, feelings, to then minimize surprise, you're hungry, go to the fridge, find food, cool. Then you're not surprised by being starved later, right? And then we combine Camus' philosophy that all artists should be working in liberation of other people through their work. That it's the artists that are best at that are the best at eliciting emotions that are predecessor to action to liberate oneself. Does that make sense? I don't know. That's something that I'm thinking through and chewing on.
The experience of that emotion is that sort of inclusive part of being human, and saying, take on this artistic perspective and feel this emotion. And this is part of all of us.
And then that just everybody's had this feeling where you see a work of art, you listen to music, you read something, and then you feel a certain way. And then you didn't feel that way before you viewed the art. But I'm more so just saying right here that my observation is then what the artist is really doing is basically inserting into your prediction machine of a brain.
It's a way that your brain can realize a situation that maybe wasn't intuitive to your experiences before. It's almost when you hear a new word for something, like that's the perfect word to describe that. With the artist, it evokes emotion.
I don't know if every artist is actually trying to consciously do that. I think it's just more of an outcome of what they do.
they're experiencing themselves as humans and they're expressing. And then sometimes that's relatable to everybody else also.
It's interesting. The best artists you always hear about are the ones that have been through the worst shit. And I think that high level, that kind of makes sense, right? How are you able to create works that create feelings in others if you haven't felt the depths of those feelings? That high level makes sense to me.
And that struggle is an opportunity to be, and to be in a unique way. And this is why I frequently find myself telling people that somebody getting a promotion that they wanted to, or they aren't in a career path that they wanted. Hey, this is your unique journey. You get to see things, feel things, experience things here that you wouldn't have on that other journey. This is yours to make meaning out of that and just help it serve you.
How does that go when you tell them that?
I think I want to see it that way. It doesn't feel that way.
Ideal and real.
But I think the ideal is something that you're hanging on to. And not only is that not an opportunity for you anymore, but embrace the opportunities that you have. And I think that's the kind of mental switch you make when you're going for something in your career and it doesn't quite go the way you want to, or maybe you don't have agency over it. I think it also comes back to just an agency model. What can I control? What can't I control?
That's true.
You can control how you make meaning out of this unique situation. And I just think there's no one way to live life. The more meaning you can make out of these struggles that you go through, the more opportunity there is for you to find ways to relate to other people in pockets.
Definitely. I think that's true. Because we're all Sisyphus rolling the boulder up the hill, right? That's the main job we're all doing. So might as well, for any kind of misstep up the hill, losing a job, not getting the right job, whatever, just you're still rolling a boulder. Making some meaning out of that, or sense making from that, to understand yourself through the suffering. I think that's what we're all here doing, whether we eat or not.
Did you see that situation this last week where the head of Sequoia Capital got ousted?
No, I didn't see that. What happened?
Roloff both was the head of Sequoia, and apparently some of the partners convinced some of the LPs that his AI strategy wasn't what they needed right now. Okay. Roloff had stewarded them through this era where they had to divest of their Chinese investments, which is a huge part of Sequoia's portfolio. He handles some rough things.
Wow.
And this is a guy you thought he's Teflon, right? He's done everything right in his career. He's done everything anybody would ever want, right? And even it's the Game of Thrones, right? Everybody in every situation is going to have a fall or a
go
struggle,
down the hill,
right? And he's being replaced by a couple of partners.
Dude, how do you make sense of that? That would be the ultimate absurd. You got this giant multi-billion-dollar portfolio through bad times and you get replaced by fruit.
Is that Apple, but it has AI that works?
Yeah, I guess that's what I thought immediately. There was some meme that they made. Oh my God. And you know what's funny? I would have believed it. Because that's how ridiculous Silicon Valley is. No, you might just leave amazing blockbuster type of portfolio and then boom, out the head of it and replace it with a fruit. I'd be like, that's Tuesday. That's hilarious though. No, but to your point, even he is Sisyphus rolling the boulder up the hill, right?
Yeah, that's the human experience.
That's what it is. We're gonna look back on this pod when we go through ups and downs with startup life. And that's just what it is. That's just what it is. All right, let's try to wrap up here. Okay, there's one more question that we'll end with. What is agency? I think I'll just ask it that way. What is agency? You mentioned that it's acting on things within your control. Do you think it has to do with the function of perceiving the system for what it is so that you know what's truly in your control? Do you think that has to do with it? Or is it you are only maximizing the agency at that particular moment based on the information you have? That, let's say that's agency A. But then would a person be higher agency if they knew more about the system but made the same choice?
I think agency at its core is being able to change your environment in a way that accommodates an internal state that you're working towards. So in the sense of being, I think agency is the ability to actuate your reality.
Okay.
So then, of course, there's a lot of details.
A lot of details.
Around what that looks like. And what was the question you asked about that?
I basically just asked, what is agency? And does agency, the function of it, does that depend on the actor's knowledge of the system? Yeah. If you had two agents, one had more knowledge of the system and they made the same choice, would you say that the person that had more knowledge but made the same choice anyway made a higher agency choice?
I mean, in that example, it seems the two are of equal agency because they're both able to take control of the situation and their environment and affect their...
Wait, okay, let me just bubble up the thought experiment, something more real. Let's say that there's you and there's another you, and you're both in the matrix, and only you know it, not other you. But you make the choice because we're all in the matrix anyway. I guess I'll go have this cup of matrix tea. And then your digital twin, the other Jonathan, who doesn't know you're in the matrix, also goes and has matrix tea. What's higher agency? You have more knowledge that you're in the system, but you made the same choice to go have tea anyway. So do you have the same agency as the other Jonathan?
I would say we're equal agency.
Equal agency, even though you have more
knowledge
of what you're doing.
Because agency is about actuation and control of your environment.
Interesting.
So do I have more potential control of my environment? I have more potential agency. Right?
But actualized agency, that's different. Oh, that. Potential agency and actualized agency. That's interesting.
Because I forget if it's the red pill or the blue pill that I'm taking in that case. I've chosen to restrain my agency and just say, hey, this is cool.
Well, now let's say there's a third version of you that's we're all in the matrix. What the fuck are you guys doing? Is that person higher agency?
Oh, so he's not getting T.
No, he's not. He's like, that's just matrix
this is
T,
fake
bro.
T, yeah.
What are you doing? You know about this and you're still doing it? You're dumb and you don't even know. Is that a higher agency, Jonathan?
What do you think the target outcome is for the third me? What's the goal?
Maybe get you guys to liberate yourselves.
Oh, okay.
That's the goal.
That seems pretty high agency. I can demonstrate to you that your reality is fake and that we can
Different
live in a different way.
Together.
I'd say that, but self 1, self 2, their goal is to have T.
Yeah.
Self 3 is to deconstruct reality. It's a different goal, and it requires actuating environment in a much different way.
Okay. So then that self 3 has higher agency, higher potential agency and higher actualized agency because they're trying to get you to do something, deconstruct your reality. Okay. Fascinating. Interesting. That's so interesting that just the concept of potential agency and actualized agency, it sounds like the takeaway is it's dependent on the goal, the agent's goal.
And self 2 is going to be self 3. What are you doing, dude? We have good T here.
It's fine.
Don't ruin it. All that exists on the other side is danger or something.
This
like
is going to kill us all. Self 3 is, I got out of the cave, guys. See what's out of the cave,
right?
Like, shit burns over there. What are you doing? That's funny. Because agency is defined by the observer, right? We are judging agency of these 3. Is that even really fair? Because we're removed from the situation, judging the situation. That's an interesting thought in itself. It's watching ants. Can we actually, from our moral different ground, judge the agency of these ants to be different from each other?
It's an interesting example, actually. Coal, the individual ant, anyway, is completely determined by the chemicals that it runs into. It doesn't have much choice-making capability.
Okay. Yeah. They're low agency, then. Or at least with this new knowledge, I think they are.
Right. And a eusocial insect that none of the individual ants pass on their genes. So they actually don't have incentive to take chances. Or, the hive as a whole or the colony as a whole may have incentive to take a risk or to make a decision. And that usually is happening with the queen and their cohorts, right?
Interesting.
And then you think about, do our cells have agency? And for the most part, but not really. And we go back to Camus and our civilizations that we're taking part in get more and more monstrous, and the bureaucracies they crack down on our behavior. Do we become more self? Do we become more the individual? That was one thought that crossed my mind in reading his essay, actually, Create Dangerously. Was this
technically, yes. Technically, we are getting less and less power over time to go change the system. So technically, yes, we are becoming more of ants over time. But then there's also another question there, which is maybe the system in the way it is allows you to explore yourself more. Because that's definitely true. Did cavemen get the chance to fucking make the Mona Lisa? No, they had to run away from saber-toothed tigers and shit.
That's life in technical feudalism. I can't buy any kind of computer that I want. I can buy them from 5 companies on the planet that make them now, right? Yeah. The choices that I get of the tools that interact with the world are going less. It's more constrained. But at the same time, within that set of constrained choices, I've got much more expression and optionality.
And it's also by constraining your amount of choices there. For example, I don't get to choose what running water I have, but I get running water. And that allows me to cook and bathe myself so I don't have to think about cooking and bathing myself to the nth degree of let me go fetch water. I don't want to make that choice, actually. But that's in itself a thing. It's just you're trading choices to make other choices. Trading some level of agency, I suppose, to have more agency in other ways.
I think that's exactly it.
It's an agency trade-off. Okay, I think that's as good of time as any to wrap the pod. We talked about the stranger. We went through the opening lines and the closing monologue that Maslow has. We talked about philosophies around Create Dangerously and related it to our own. We also talked about clarity a little bit, philosophy of what does it mean to become your best self and how we bake that into our product Clarity. Go check it out. It should be in the links. This was thoroughly enjoyable. We're now reading more philosophy, so we'll just do more pods on this and do the same thing where we have more discussion questions, talk about things. So if there are books or philosophers or concepts that you're interested in hearing from us about, definitely drop it in the comments, and we're always trying to respond to those. Jonathan, thanks a lot, dude. This was super fun. And for everybody, have a great day. Catch you next time.